Okay, great. Okay, hi everybody. All right, so hi everybody. My name is Miguel Moniz. I'm coming at you from Lisbon, Portugal, or actually in the rural countryside outside of Lisbon, Portugal, technically in the Lisbon district, but in an area that we like to call the West. In any case, I am looking forward to continuing our conversations. I don't know, some of you were participated in our the last discussions that we had, talking about the history of Cape Verdean and Portuguese people in Falmouth and that migration to Falmouth. Today, we're going to be talking about, or this course anyway, we're going to be talking about some different things. That course was really focused mostly on history of that particular community. One thing I'd like to talk about with this program is how not only Portuguese Cape Verdeans became a part of Falmouth, but how some of the other rituals and ceremonies that we have in Falmouth also contribute to a sense of community building and community cohesion in some cases, ways for people who are outsiders to become insiders. And I'm going to expand on some of the histories of these communities, but our focus, the focus of the lens is really going to be through Portuguese and Cape Verdean participation in these events. But through that, we're actually going to talk about a lot much broader, much more broader information. So we've got today, I've kind of broken the course down. I'm going to share my PowerPoint with you here. Let me just close this. And then I will share my screen with you. There we go. So can everybody see that? Hopefully you can all see this.
Yes.
Should be a title page. Yeah. Okay, good. So as it says here, rituals and festivals, Cape Verdean, Portuguese, and other placemaking celebrations in Falmouth. And I have some images here that are some classic iconographic images that some of you may know, others maybe not. This is taken down here from the holiday parade, December Falmouth. When I was a kid, they called it the Christmas parade, but it's the annual holiday parade in Falmouth. This is the from actually right outside the front of the library, memorial plaque dedicated to memorial war dead that were from Falmouth natives. This is an image from the annual Cape Verdean Clubs annual feast. This is a kashupa truck that they had serving food out here. This is from the Holy Ghost or the Festive do Espírito Santo festival in front of St. Anthony's Church, and this is from the East Falmouth Irmandad. And this one here is from, there's obviously images here of 4th of July, but behind that we see the pilgrim commemorations. This isn't specifically Falmouth. However, it's the Cape, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the pilgrim commemorations that took place at the turn of the century in a later class. So, just as an introduction to the course, again, these are images. These are actually images from the annual Cape Verdean Club feast, the annual commemoration that they have every year. Well, before COVID hit, anyway. Anyway, so just to give you kind of a brief little introduction here to the course. Today, I'm mostly going to be talking about what a ritual is. Like, everybody knows everybody talks about rituals, or if I were to ask everybody here, what's a ritual, you probably could name a bunch. But I'm going to give you some examples and try and give you some background for some of the things that we're going to talk about in greater depth. Those of you who were in the course last time, I often would talk about some sort of historical context or theoretical ideas, and then would jump into each class. This one's going to be a little bit different, and then I'm going to try and get all that stuff out today. And then save the next 3 weeks talking about the rituals and the festivals themselves, and then I will come back into and talk about some of these other some of these other ideas that I'll present to you today. So my partner in crime, Lou White, will be joining us. He was unable to make it today, and he may not also be able to make it next week, so I may have to switch this around. But one of the rituals I'd like to talk about is the Festive do Espírito Santo. It's a major event. I don't know if those of you who are on, I can see your images. If you could just raise your hand if any of you have ever been to a Holy Ghost feast or have ever been to a Festive do Espírito Santo in Falmouth. If you could raise your hands. Yep, there's plenty of people there. Well, you're in luck if you haven't been, because they're going to be starting up again this year. One's in May. So, you should check that out. Another show of hands, if you've gone to some other of the festivals that we have here. Have you gone to has anyone here gone to the Cape Verdean Club's annual
Miguel, you just got muted for some reason. Miguel? Yeah.
I think am I back on? Am I back
Yes,
live?
yes, sorry about that. Yeah,
Okay.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah, no problem. So, have any of you been to a graduation at the high school? Show of hands. Yes, yes, no. Okay. Have any of you been to a graduation before in general, not just a Falmouth High School? Well, sure, everyone has. Have you all been to let's see, what are some of the 4th of July fireworks? Yep, everybody. Have you ever been to a club dinner of any kind of club that you belong to? The VFW, the AMVETS, the church group that you belong to? Yes, probably everybody. Well, the long and short of it is that those are all rituals. Now, we tend to think of rituals sometimes as and certainly there's a difference between how a lot of people talk about rituals versus how anthropologists talk about rituals. So I'm going to try and give you an anthropological perspective on rituals. Now, rituals really came out of, the theories about rituals, why rituals exist, why we do them, really came out of anthropological theory. Some of it came out of literary theory, really beginning in the 19th century, some of this writing, looking at myths and looking at religious practices of peoples around the world. But one of the things that I would like to do with this course is to point out how important it is that when we think of rituals, we're not just talking about religion. We're really talking about how communities get built. We're talking about the events that people participate in that build a community, that make communities communities, that make people belong to a place. How do people share social life with one another? And, as I say over here, how do rituals also lead for some individuals or for some groups that are not as visible as other groups, or that might be marginalized? How do those rituals also lead towards visibility, equality, and inclusion? What is the meaning? Why do we have celebrations? Why do we memorialize things? These are all some of the things that I hope to get to. So, or not I hope to get to, that my course will eventually talk about. So again, we can sort of separate between religious rights and secular rights, and people obviously often want to do that. When they want to say, what's the difference between going to a religious service, for example, or going to the 4th of July? Most people would think of those perhaps as very different kinds of rituals, and in some ways they are. But what I'm going to try and argue over the course of the next 4 weeks will be that they actually share much more in common with one another, at least in the ways that I'm going to talk about them, than we might think at first blush. So I'll ask for you to kind of expand your imagination here over the next couple of weeks to think about all of the different ways that we have rituals in our lives. And there's a difference between individual rituals and collective rituals. We're mostly going to be talking about collective rituals, but so I'd like you to think about these rituals as what we're really talking about, how we all share social life with one another, how we have communities that share social life with one another. And again, I'll also mention what these photos are, just so those of you know. This is actually making the meal at the Holy Ghost Feast and at Fresh Pond Holy Ghost Hall, but this is the East Falmouth, what they call the Azorian Feast group of immigrants from Terceira, as we talked about last time in our class. So, rituals, origins and meanings. Anybody know what this is? It says it right there. I guess I can't cover it up. But this is a picture from the Falmouth Enterprise of the annual Nurses Fete, the VNA's Visiting Nurses Association Nurses Fete, that my mother, who's in the program right now, used to take me to when I was a kid, and I used to complain when I was very young that they didn't have as good rides as Barnstable County Fair. But as I've gotten older, I've come to appreciate more how interesting and neat the VNA Nurses Fete annual fete was. That took place in Falmouth. This is, of course, from an image of from a holiday parade, Falmouth by the Sea holiday parade. So we have, when we talk about rituals, their origins and their meanings, we really want to separate out some different parts of what a ritual is. So first off is when we think about a ritual, it's what's the story that we tell ourselves of why we're doing that ritual, or the mythology of why we're doing that ritual. In other words, why do people talk about the rituals that they do? When we talk about a parade, we might say, well, we're having this annual parade to commemorate Thanksgiving. We have, there's the different elements of that are floats representing different aspects of the event. Well, that's kind of how we talk about it, and that's maybe the reason that we have it, the excuse for it in some ways. And those are some of the elements. There's a parade, people put on floats, they sponsor their floats, they create a theme, or they try and stick with the theme, and they might win prizes. So that's sort of the way that people talk about the rituals, or that people know, and people also know the rules of the ritual as well. Think about any ritual that you have, even if it's a club meeting, if it's an annual celebration, if it's a Thanksgiving ritual, for example. Let's use Thanksgiving. It's a great example. It's something that everybody does, celebrates. Pretty much everybody celebrates Thanksgiving in the U.S. So one thing that really, it's one of the most common things that we do. So, what are I'm going to do a little experiment here, and maybe experiment with trying to bring you guys into this discussion. So remember, just hit the space bar and you can talk, and then let go of the space bar and you'll be muted. So what are some of the rituals that everybody shares at Thanksgiving, that everyone across the country that celebrates Thanksgiving, that they share? Well, what's like one main thing that they all share? And just jump in, hit your space bar and jump in. Turkey, yeah, exactly, Gil. So turkey is one thing that everybody obviously shares. What's another thing that people share?
Football.
What do you usually have your Thanksgiving meal with?
Cranberries. Family.
Yeah, cranberries, certainly around in these parts, you definitely have cranberries. That's definitely one that you have. A lot of people might not like cranberries, but that's certainly one. If you're from New England, you definitely have cranberries. What are some other things that you might do at Thanksgiving? Who do you have that meal generally with?
Family.
Yeah, you generally have that meal with family or very, very close friends, right? So that's another thing, a ritual element that is shared of the ritual of Thanksgiving. If we were to ask you, how long has Thanksgiving been celebrated? What might some of you say?
All my life.
Well, certainly all our lives. Well, actually, maybe not certainly all of our lives, but definitely. When was the first Thanksgiving? Let me ask the question like that.
When I was born, 1947 for me.
So Roz has it down cold. Most people would probably not say that. Most people would probably say, well, when the Pilgrims had their first Thanksgiving, right? And what we know historically is that may be how we talk about Thanksgiving, and we sort of say, yes, we're commemorating this meal of the Pilgrims. But really, the first Thanksgiving took place when Franklin Delano Roosevelt created a national holiday, right? As Roz says, in the 40s. I didn't know it was 47, but I knew it was in the 40s sometime. I knew it was Franklin Roosevelt that did this. So, when we talk about these rituals, there's a difference between how we talk about them, how we think about them, their ritual elements, and what they actually accomplish. So how anthropologists might talk about the ritual of Thanksgiving would in some ways be very different from other people. So we're not going to really talk about what the anthropologists would say right now. We're just going to move on. And by the end of this, of course, we will, of course, get there. But keep in mind, as we talk about this, what does a ritual do? When someone goes through a ritual, what does it do for them as an individual? And what does it do for the society that they're a part of? So, we can, and another way that we can talk about this is, let's talk about Christmas as an annual ritual. So we might talk about the religious aspects of a Christmas celebration. What are the religious elements of it? What is being celebrated there from a religious perspective? But we also might look at other secondary things that happen with it as well. How does Christmas support the economy, for example? How does it create connections between people that haven't seen each other in a long time? How does it create connections through gift exchanges between people? How does Christmas help people to connect that might be far away, far apart. Similarly to Thanksgiving. Sometimes, people make a really big deal out of going home for Thanksgiving, something they might not do on some random weekend, right? So these rituals actually do a great deal for us in terms of creating community, in terms of creating concrete connections between us as people. Yeah, Roz, are you jumping in? You got to hold it while you talk, Roz.
Yes, I'm jumping in. Yes. Okay. Well, I grew up in Falmouth, so we always had a football game, high school football game, and we played against Barnstable. We still do to present. So when I was in high school, we had that. We had the football game. We all went. It was either in Barnstable or in Falmouth. And we had buses going to Falmouth if the kids could not go on a car or whatever. We would bring buses to Barnstable and come back and then go home. I was on the pep squad at that time, so I was a part of the band. But that was the ritual. Everyone go and have dinner. I had family in Hyannis, so it was a real competition. And when the whole family would come together, it's like one side of the family would be crying. But that's all.
So that's a perfect example, though, and something that actually we still do until today. We still have these games that we play. In fact, this game I would call the everything that's around that game, including the pep rallies, including all the events that go along with it. All constitute part of this ritual, and in fact, it connects us not only to each other in the present, but it also connects us through time in some ways. We have memories of the rituals that we did when we were young. We can talk about the memories of those older rituals with younger people today. It's also a way that we can help to teach younger people that haven't gone through those rituals about the present and about life. We're able to teach them through these rituals also lessons about life, about what are things that individuals value that they want to pass on to others. And like you point out, by having gone to these, you remember when you were in the pep squad, and everybody remembers this. I remember when I was a kid going to Falmouth, Falmouth Barnstable football game. It was a big deal. And still is, depending on who's better or who's worse and all that. In fact, every year I always check. Like I don't pay attention to any Falmouth High School football scores really, except for friends of mine's kids now are playing. Sometimes I'll pay attention to their Facebook posts, but I always look to see who won that Falmouth Barnstable game. Like I always want to know who won that game, and it doesn't really matter at all to me. But I want to know. And if Falmouth wins, I'm like yeah. And if they lose, I'm like oh well, next year. So moving on. So some of the things that we've been talking about right now are ways that anthropologists talk about what a ritual is. So, in some ways, rituals take what's a chaotic universe and give some kind of order to it. It allows people to make sense of a world that is in large part chaotic. If you think about the amount of rituals that we go through every day, both personal and collective, the ones that we do in groups and the one we do on our own, our entire day is made up of rituals that we are going through. Even if it's just the order that we brush our, get ready for the day, how we brush our teeth, how we, wash up, how we take our breakfast. And then the rituals that we have at work, the rituals that we have with coworkers, the rituals that we have with our families, when we see them, before we see them, how we visit them. These are all things that provide, in a sense, that provide order to us. And, from an anthropologist perspective. There's a metaphysical sense of this also. And I don't know if any of you have read or heard of Joseph Campbell. He's a person that wrote a lot about myths and mythologies. He went around and tried to collect as many myths as he could. I guarantee you this book is at Falmouth Public Library, although I haven't looked it up in the catalog. There's certainly, Joseph Campbell's work is definitely in the clam system, certain. Sue is over there looking right now to see if it is, to make sure.
Which book? Which Campbell book are you asking about?
I just any of the Joseph Campbell books.
Oh yeah, I'll look.
We collected all these rituals around the world, and some of these things he sort of these are Joseph Campbell's, the first 4 or 5 anyway. However, they were actually based on some older thinking. One that we're going to talk a lot about is integration into a social community. That's one thing. The two kind of main ones that I'm going to talk about in the next few weeks are, how do these rituals that we practice help us to integrate into our social community? How do they create stronger ties in the community? And how do they also help people within communities to, to find a place for themselves in that community where they might not have had a place before? For example, one of the earliest, and I've talked about this a little bit just to give you a little teaser, but one of the earliest times that I found reference to Portuguese and Cape Verdean communities in America have been, in newspaper reports I'm talking about, have been when clubs of Portuguese, Azorians, Cape Verdeans, Madeireans, when clubs of these individuals have, like even some going back to the late 1800s, when they were participating in 4th of July parades. So there'd be a 4th of July parade that would call for all the community civic organizations to come. And some of those organizations were participating in these 4th of July parades in like the late 1800s. So, and they got positive press written about them in the newspapers. So this is one way that communities can integrate, is by participating in some of these social community events that take place. Groups are able to mark their identity. They're able to show that they belong to a place, that they're participating in the life of that place. So this is one thing that we're going to talk about an awful lot, which is integration into a social community. There are also psychological aspects that guide personal growth that we can talk about. This one of Joseph Campbell, what his big contribution was, one of the things that he talked about was to try and catalog all of the rituals all around the world, all the mythologies around the world, and point out how the elements in them that had things in common, that were all about heroes. And this was something shared throughout. That was one of the things that he talked about, was the dying hero and rebirth. These were elements of ritual that were shared no matter where the person was that was telling the story, no matter what part of the world they were from, no matter what religious or national tradition they were from. There are elements shared throughout all of these. And that's one thing that's really important to me, is that as we talk about all of these rituals, we're going to talk about them in their specifics, but I'd like to also talk about them as far as the things that they share, all the elements that they share, the things that link us as human beings, to all other human beings on the planet, in our need for these kinds of ritualized behaviors. Even if some of the rituals might mark us as different than others, we all are participating in these kinds of rituals. So what are some specific anthropological kinds of rituals? So I've kind of, the last 20 minutes or so of my time here before we start talking about have questions, I'm going to talk about 6. There's more. Anthropologists have arguments about which of these are, they get into very fine-grained arguments about these. I'm giving you kind of a very broad overview of 6 different kinds of rituals that we can talk about. And there are all kinds of overlap among all of these. And the rituals that we'll talk about in the next 3 weeks, that will include some guest speakers as well. Those rituals will all fit into different of these categories. So the first that I would talk about are rites of passage. So what are rites of passage? A rite of passage is a ritual that one participates in, where they start off in one state of being, they go through the ritual, and then they have a completely different status on the other side. So, for example, let's take turning 8, or not turning 18, but turning 21. What is it about turning 21 that makes someone more capable of going to a bar? Is there anything that makes someone more capable of going to a bar when they're 21 or before they're 20, like on the day before their 21st birthday, the day after their 21st birthday? That's a question. I'll answer it. It's a rhetorical question. There's nothing. Like, it's just a number that gets fixed. It's a way that we societally say, that someone's status has changed, their practical status, their legal status has changed. They're the same person as they were the day before. Likewise with a high school graduation, presumably you've gone through some training, but you could have gone through all that same training, not actually had your diploma conferred upon you, and you don't have the rights of someone who's graduated from high school. And those getting that conference on you actually changes your status. Similarly, we can talk about someone who gets married. they have their legal status completely and entirely changes. It doesn't matter. The nature of their relationship might not change from one day to the next, but their legal status has changed. The way they are seen by society has changed. So, we can talk about all kinds of different coming of age rites of passage, rights, rites of passage in which people get more rights. These are all different kinds of rites of passage that take place. Can anybody think of a rite of passage that I haven't mentioned?
Yes, I grew up in the Jewish tradition, so bar mitzvahs.
That's a phenomenal rite of passage. Bar mitzvah, actually, you're now a full-fledged member of the community, the religious community, correct? When you have
Yeah,
a bar
and you're an
mitzvah,
adult in the community.
you're an adult, right? It creates a state of adult. There's a similar thing in Catholicism as confirmation. But yes, exactly. Bar mitzvahs are definitely one. And in some ways, I think confirmations are a little more mealy. They're a little softer in terms of your status as an adulthood. When you actually have certain rights within Judaic ritual, once you've become a bar mitzvah, like you can participate as an adult in particular rights. So it actually gives you a tremendous amount of power, actually. And again, you go through a whole training period before you get bar mitzvahed. If I'm not mistaken, you have to learn how to read out of the Torah, if I'm not mistaken. And you have to publicly present yourself to the community as well. But at the end of the day, you're the same guy that you were or gal that you were 10 minutes before the conferring, before the ceremony of the bar mitzvah takes place. What's changed is your status in that community. That's a rite of passage. Next are calendrical rights, and I'm not going to really talk about these because we already talked about these, a bunch of them earlier when we talked about Thanksgiving. These are rights that take place every year at the same time of year, and they never miss. And that includes Thanksgiving, 4th of July, harvest festivals. There are also various celebrations on religious calendars as well that take place annually. Rosh Hashanah, Easter, and some of these don't exactly take place on the exact time of year. I would also put in some of the Islamic rituals as well into this, which those that are on a lunar calendar also sort of shift. I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that a lot of rituals in Judaism are on the Jewish calendar, so they also don't quite match up with the Gregorian calendar. But Easter is also something that's not on is also on a floating calendar. That's based on how religious keep time rather than our secular Gregorian calendar. So these are annual rites that we have every year. We transform our lives around them. And if you think about, if you just drove through town, not knowing what time of the year it was, somebody, if you just had your eyes closed and somebody said, I'm going to magically put you into a particular time of year, do you think, and I'm not going to, without any reference to, how hot it is out, how cold it is out, if there's snow on the ground or not, just looking at how people decorate their homes, I would bet that 90% of the year you'd be able to be accurate within about a month of what time of the year it was. And that's because of the fact that these rituals really predominate. These annual cycles of rituals that we have dominate the way that we live our lives. Think about all the things that we organize around Memorial Days, all the things that we organize around different celebrations, not just religious celebrations, but secular celebrations as well. I mean, we go as far as even having, everybody would say, yes, at Thanksgiving you have turkey, but guess what? You also have certain, at 4th of July, I think in Falmouth, it's a big tradition to eat salmon, if I'm not mistaken, on 4th of July in Falmouth. Other people have different, Memorial Day, you have a barbecue, or 4th of July, you have a barbecue with hamburgers and hot dogs, or whatever. So, there are specific food items. We completely transform the way that we live. We go shopping at certain times of year based around these holidays. We infuse tremendous amounts of money into the economy based on these holidays. Our businesses rely upon, in fact, some of these annual rituals in order to survive. Think about what Falmouth would do without Memorial Day. When would summer start? When would tourists start coming in? these rituals are extremely important for our livelihoods, for the way that we think about, for the way that we're able to survive and the way that we live our lives, the way that we, share community with others as well. So, these annual festivals are very, very important. Moving on. We also have rites of exchange and communion, and some of these are actually quite religious. One of the things that anthropologists talk about, and that Joseph Campbell actually also talked about, and some of the other earlier writers about religion, was that many of the rituals that we have, or there's a certain set of rituals that we have that are about communion. It's either communion with other people or communion between people who are on earth with people who are not on earth. And that includes God, other deities, saints, the deceased, people that that are not present. So these are other kinds of rituals that we have. Rituals where we come together, we communicate or commune in some ways with people who are not, with individuals or entities or deities or God, whatever you want to call it, that is not present. And we have rituals around this, either personal rituals that we have when we pray or when we do other sorts of forms of trying to to communicate with between this world and another world, or other ways that we have of talking about ourselves or trying to just get control over uncontrollable things in our lives. So these are rituals of communion. I also add into this rituals of intensification, and rituals of intensification are rituals that are intended, at least, to help us to create a common sense of purpose with others, to rededicate ourselves to common principles, rededicate ourselves to the symbols of a society. And I would put, some of the ones that we already talked about. 4th of July, for example, is in some ways a rite of intensification. A rite of intensification signaling patriotism. We can also talk about some other forms of that have joined into these holidays that are in some ways rites of intensification. Thanksgiving being something around family, our renewing our purposes to our family, remembering why we're together, or why Uncle Tony drives us crazy. But these are all still nonetheless rituals that of intensification.
Yeah, we just got a good comment. Birth and death are rituals that have been rather hijacked and removed from family control. We chose to have all our kids born at home with family and some friends around. Awareness and support for death at home and with family has also been returning.
Yeah, that's a great, that's a fantastic comment. And that the part of that is how some of these rituals have transformed. And we're going to talk about, when we get to number 6, we're going to talk about power, the power relations of some of these rituals. And the fact is that, yes, absolutely. Some of these rituals that we've had for centuries and millennia, for example, and even recently, I know family members who talk about having wakes in a living room, and the person was laid out to rest, the deceased family member, the loved one was laid out to rest in a living room. Now the process has transformed a great deal. It's almost taken out of the family's hands. We could say this about a lot of things. We could talk about every year the Portuguese American Association has an annual matança do porco, which is they kill a pig and then roast the pig. And murdering or killing a pig might seem barbaric to some, but what happens every day? People go to a supermarket. We've just been removed from the process of that ritual. Rather than raising the pig ourselves, killing the pig ourselves, and then eating that pig throughout the year, we're still eating a pig. We're just not doing the killing and the other parts of that ritual. So I think this is a transformation that takes place over the 20th century entirely. That much of our birth rituals, much of our death rituals have been have shifted to other people having control or power over those. Some of these are logical in that in certain situations things are safer, but I think we can also talk about the fact that they actually also take away from us a certain amount of humanity and our ability to process grief. It's really transformed the way that we think about grief. It's really transformed the way we think also about what our responsibilities are to life and to taking care of life and these kinds of things, which I think are both reflected in our rituals, and I think that our rituals also will also how can I put it? It both reflects our who we are, but our rituals also create us as well. The fact that we do these rituals actually gives us ideas about how we're supposed to live in the world, that actually normalize how we live in the world as well. Something that we'll also talk about. There's rites of affliction. Rites of affliction, for example, one thing that I do in my anthropology classes, introduction to anthropology classes with my students, is I have them read about Trobian Islander fishing practices. This is actually quite a drought rite that I am superimposing next to images of Nomar Garcia Parra. I don't know if anybody remembers Nomar going up to the plate and some of the things that he did. But when we talk about rites of affliction, we're talking about rituals that are done to end negative problems or to create positive outcomes. And what I always point out is that Trobian Islanders go through an incredible ritual. And in fact, most fishermen in general are extremely ritualized in the behaviors that they have. They're very religious about it. Many fishermen have really devout religiosity, at least as I'm thinking about in the Azores in any case. But I think this is true in other places as well. In any event, they're very ritualized. They participate in greatly ritualized behaviors. And then we can juxtapose that with baseball players who also participate in extraordinarily ritualized behavior, especially when it comes to going up to the plate. Like if you've ever seen Nomar and the whole crazy ritual he did where he touched his gloves, and apparently he was touching his glove like a certain exact number of times every time. He did the exact same thing every time he went up to the plate. And the reason for this, according to anthropologists, and this is from George Gemelch, in this case, that each of these activities really was about trying to create a sense of confidence when people are facing something that have very, very unpredictable odds. So although fishermen obviously know where to go for a catch, it's very difficult, especially without modern technological equipment, storm equipment, to know when there'd be a massive storm coming. I mean, obviously people have ways of telling when there's storms, but getting caught and dying in storms is something that happens a lot with fishermen, especially as they go far out. And the unpredictability of catches, the unpredictability of safety has parallels with the unpredictability of hitting a baseball. Like the outcome is very difficult. I mean, even the best hitters in the entire world, hit the ball like 1 out of 3 times, or put the ball into play even, fewer, like half the time. So it's an extremely volatile and unpredictable thing. And we can think about also these rituals that we have to create, and this is again goes back to creating order in a chaotic universe. What's probably going to help Nomar hit the ball better is his hand-eye coordination, the fastness of his bat speed. How quickly he's able to pick up the ball off of the pitcher's hand, and if he can read, what kind of a pitch it is. Is it going to drop? Is it going to stay up in the zone? Is it faster? Is it slower? These are technical skills that make Nomar or other hitters these days much better than you or I might be. However, there are also these other things that they do as well, and they have this reliance on these rituals, not changing one's t-shirt or underwear during a hitting streak, or only eating a certain meal all the time. These are ways to get control over an uncertain world, and is shared with some of the other things like dances to end drought. Although we might not think of them as the same thing right off the bat. They are, however. Here's another comment. And I think this goes back to our, let me get to I'm going to blast through these and then I'll get to everyone's comments, because I think this is about, I'll read this at the end. We'll talk about them once we get through. This is in feasting. Perfect comment for feasting. So feasting, and these are a bunch of images I have here from, this is the Cape Verdean Col de Saint Jean, which is a June festival that takes place every year. That has actually taken place at the Cape Verdean Club in Falmouth, and in other places. This is actually from Cabo Verde, this image. This is some pictures that I took of a Holy Ghost feast. These two right here. This is at St. Anthony's Church. We're going to talk about this at length. This is from the meal that gets shared afterwards. This down here is from Brazilian Carnival. Carnival is a really big event, and especially with the number of Brazilian immigrants in Falmouth, this is a of increasingly becoming a Falmouth event as well. And then we have an image here of the Jamaican night at Cluna Messed Inn, which is something that I want to talk about a little bit too in a later class, which I think is really interesting about how immigrants are able to create space for themselves in communities in which they're new. And food and restaurants are a really important way of creating these kinds of communities, or helping people to create this kind of community and gain acceptance. The main feasts, though, that I'll talk about are some of the feasts at the Cape Verdean Club, and that we're going to talk about at also at the Holy Ghost feast, or the Espírito Santo feast that we have, that Falmouth holds every year. The clubs, the immigrant clubs, are really interesting in this as well, because the clubs actually have dinners throughout the year. Like I'm a member of the Cape Verdean Club of Falmouth and the Portuguese American Association of Falmouth. And every month I get emails for all the really fascinating, interesting dinners that they have and that they put on, throughout the year. And these are rituals that they have. These are really interesting, fascinating commemorations. We can also look at historical events as well, with these festivals, fasting that take place, by looking at also some of the concerts that used to take place at Cape Verdean Club, with some major acts, really top acts out there. As well as I'm still trying to research, but we'll hopefully have the research done by the time the class happens on it, the fascinating beauty pageant that took place, a Cape Verdean beauty pageant that took place at Falmouth Cape Verdean Club, that ended up spreading across southeastern New England, Massachusetts, that we'll talk about as well. One of the interesting things to talk about with feasting, fasting, and festivals, and by the way, we can talk about Christmas festival, Thanksgiving, as a feasting, fasting, or a feasting and fasting festival. The feasting is obvious. The fasting is when your mother tells you not to eat yet because it's not ready yet, and you have to wait another hour before dinner's coming out. But in any case, there's other forms of fasting that have more religious connotations, including Lenten fasting. Fasting during Ramadan, for example, is another form of fasting. So one thing I would like to talk about, though, are inversion rituals. Inversion rituals are rituals that create a space in which everyday normal life is suspended. And during that time period, what anthropologists call a liminal state, or what anthropologists call this sort of betwixt and between period, you're freed from the normal rules and conventions of society, and you can do things that you don't normally do. You can participate in activities that you don't normally participate in. And rather than that being something that's looked down upon by society, is actually something that's expected by society. So, Carnival happens and you can go out and take over the streets. Here's a holiday parade that takes place in Falmouth, for example. If I normally, dressed up like an elf and drove my car 5 miles an hour down Main Street, I'd probably get arrested, right? And the cops would come and throw me in jail. But we get to do those kinds of things in the frame of that parade. So we're able to sort of, this gets back to some psychological issues as well that anthropologists talk about, where living in a society of norms and rules is very complicated for us. We push back on them. We want to do things that aren't related to those rules. And one way that we are able to sort of express these are our innermost desires to rebel against those rules, even though we have to live by them day by day, is by creating these frames, these rituals in which we can throw all that off and act crazy for a little bit, or do things that we don't normally do. Boxing Day, for example, is a really good example of this. If you know the tradition in England of Boxing Day. Anybody know what happens on Boxing Day in England? The day after Christmas. So the day after Christmas, if any of you have seen Downton Abbey, there's always that ritual where all of the aristocrats and the people that were in charge and the manors waited on and served the people that usually served them throughout the day. And rather than the people that usually serve the aristocrats doing that, they would dance with them. They'd go to balls and they would dance actually with the people that they were working with. So the kinds of, and Roberto D'Amata talks about how this is that societies, the norms and rules of society are like a pressure cooker. We want to brush off and blast through all of these. And in fact, we are able to do these rituals, and we're able to do things that we wouldn't normally do. A lot of times, a lot of these rituals, for example, Cola San Juan, for example, you can see this. You can see that these, well, we'll talk about these again in deeper and greater length, but actually there's a comment here directly related to this. I guess Doreen Diaz said she went to Festive San Juan de Batista, or which is the festa that the Cola San Juan takes place at in Fogo, Cabo Verde. So that's interesting. When we talk about that, I hope that you'll be able to maybe talk about that experience as well. But if we look at this, this is like a Portuguese flag here, and if we look at the colonialism in Cabo Verde, some of these rituals are designed so that you can make fun of, or that you can. It creates a space to be able to criticize people with power. And some of these rituals, in some of these rituals, that takes place. If you look at some of the more political, Carnival in Portugal, for example, in the north, in Guarda, has this every year where they actively, openly make fun of political figures. They make fun of local people. They make fun of religion. They make fun of all these things that they live their lives by very, very seriously and earnestly throughout the year. But in that little space of Carnival, the rules are allowed to change. So this is another interesting aspect of ritual. The last kind of rituals I'll talk about are political rituals. And within this political ritual is the notion that political rituals aren't just symbolizing power, they're actually creating power. That when we have, and I only have actual really obvious examples of political rituals here, but I would put, this image of Cola San Juan as a political ritual. I would put this as a political ritual as well, if one understands the relationship of some of these Azorian immigrants to the church historically. And how, for example, Portuguese language masses at certain points in the history of the church was taken out of St. Anthony's Church, and how some of those people that still spoke Portuguese were able to, in some ways, kind of take back over this, this space. So political rituals are not just related to politics, like I have here. They're also related to other forms of engagement with power and ways that people can try and get power for themselves. And rituals are very, very important ways to do this. They allow people that might be marginalized to create space for themselves. This is an example of this. Now, this looks like a normal run-of-the-mill Massachusetts State House event. But what this is the Portuguese Language a Day event in the Massachusetts State House. So under normal, although there are many Portuguese American and Portuguese born and Cape Verdean American and Cape Verdean born senators, state senators and state reps, what you have here, however, is a day that basically was dedicated to the Day of Portugal. They also have one of these day of celebration for Cape Verdean independence as well. But the point is that these are political events in how they help people to get a space for themselves within society. And we also, groups of immigrants or marginalized, people who are maybe outside of power, how they can represent for themselves and get closer to power or represent the power that they might have. Another way to put it is maybe getting a place at the table. And so the other point about political rituals is, one thing that we said earlier is that a lot of these rituals are not just about symbolizing things that really exist, but rituals actually can help to create a reality that might not exist. So we're going to talk about that at length, during the next few weeks when we go into some of these actual rituals. I want to stop there. I threw up here just a little summary here of some of those rights again, and then I'd like to just leave you with some further readings here, if you want to take a look at that. Some things that you might take a look at. Some of these are old anthropology books, but if you want to do a deeper dive into rituals, I'll leave that there. I want to read some of these comments though that I missed. So the Chinese honor their ancestors via many festivals which still exist, as in April. They have a sweeping of the Grace Festival in August. The Feast of the Hungry Ghost involves offerings of food to ancestors at many sites. I observed many such festivals living in Chinese countries in the 60s through the 80s and understand these rituals still are observed, a strong connection to their ancestors. This is from Kirsten Moritz. So yeah, I mean, this is a really interesting way of communicating with. If we look back here at our list, this is a really good example of rites of exchange and communion. Speaking with ancestors, speaking with individuals that are that are not present, and is a major part of not only how we organize our lives, but also it helps us cope, right? I mean, religious rituals are of course about the person that's deceased, but moreover, funerary rituals are moreover about the person who's deceased. But moreover, they're really about the people that are living that now have lost that individual that's deceased. How do they make sense of what's happened? How do they connect with one another? How do they go through a ritual that's able to help them to feel better and confront their lives now that person is gone? So these are rites of communion, as you point out. Doreen, I'm gonna go ahead and press down on your space bar maybe, and do you want to talk a little bit about the ritual that you went to, the Festa San João that you went to, and the Col de San João that you saw in Fogo?
Kirsten, are you there?
No, this is Doreen.
Oh, Doreen, okay.
Hello?
Yeah, there you go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hi. Yes, it's a tradition and an honor for a family in Cabo Verde to host the San Juan Festival. And my cousin and her husband were selected to do one in Cabo, Fogo, Cape Verde Islands in 2012. And a group of my family traveled there from Massachusetts and me from California to attend this festival. It's June 24th. And yeah, it was very interesting. There's many aspects. And like I said, it's an honor. You have to feed the entire village. They slaughter the animals as part of the religious ceremony right in front of everybody during the festival, and the animals just hang there until they're ready to be cooked. And they have dancing and drums and the pounding of the mas, and a march where they go down to the beach and raise the cross down at the beach. Fogo has a black beach from the volcanoes eruption, so it's black beach, which turns hard like snow in the heat. It's like footprints in it, just like you would see in the new snow. So they go down and back, and they also, and I can't think of the name of it, but part of the celebration is celebrating the weather and aspects of the weather. And wow, I wish I could think of it. So this person dresses up. I do have pictures of some of it. He dresses up, and there's a big issue of the wind coming and the sand coming onto the island. So he's like symboling, like dressing up almost like a sand monster. And the most interesting thing is during this actual part of this festival, that night was almost like this blinding, windy sand where you actually had to cover your face during part of this march. It was very spiritual. I mean, there's no way you can control this huge, but it's sand coming, I guess, from Africa, or the wind somehow changed directions or something. But this sand was like this burning sand, which was actually part of something that they celebrate. So it was very, very interesting. It was our first time going, and I hope to go back because I didn't have a translator present. My cousin that spoke English was, she was busy as the host to really understand all aspects of it. But next time I go, I'm going to have somebody right there to be my translator.
So yeah, what's interesting about this, as Dorian points out, is that you actually went to Cabo Verde for this ritual, and these rituals are so big and so important that they really determine. I mean, it's not inexpensive to travel to another country and to spend time in that place. I mean, it's a large family expense, and but yet it's an impetus for people to do that. For example, you have even regionally it's done. Like people who are up in Canada will come to Falmouth for a ritual here, or people who are, and I'm thinking, in this case of Holy Ghost, but I know for a fact also that people come from New Bedford or Providence to come to the Cape Verdean club's annual feast, right? Roz, maybe you're gonna say exactly that.
All right. Yes. Okay. The Cape Verdean community, we have is St. John's Day, we call here. It just as Doreen was saying, is that her name? Dadias? We have, so it's in Cabo. In Cabo, they have a club that's just for St. John's Day, and they have a statue of him. So this is a 3-day observation also. And I support it by going usually on the last day when they have all the festivities and climbing of the tree and the music and all that. But I also have pictures of that.
Yeah. So what's interesting also is that both of you have brought up that this is on June 24th. Now, guess what? June 24th is also a huge celebration for a Brazilian community as well, São João Baptist. And it's also a huge celebration for, although it's not as big of a thing in the Azores, as it turns out, the community in Falmouth, the newer immigrants in Falmouth from Tessera, have a major celebration every year on their island called the San Joaninas Festival. And it's a part of, there's always saints festivals dedicated to saints over this time period. Like if you read The Sun Also Rises, the San Fermin festival in Papillona, guess what? That's a saint festival similar to the ones that we're talking about right now. So, for example, this San João, or San Joaninas as they call it, always takes place on the 24th. And the Holy Ghost festival that takes place in Falmouth is specifically designed to take place as close to the weekend of the 24th as possible, so that they can, celebrate that day and that event. So it's interesting that you have all different groups celebrating this event on different days in different ways, and with their own specific, cultural complexes around it, or sets of rituals that they do around it.
Also, Miguel, one of the big festivals, which, I'm from San Diego, but a lot of people from all over California and all over the United States travel to Onset for the Onset Cape Verdean Festival in August. And that's not a date really, to my knowledge, of a religious festival, but it is a tradition that's gone on for, I don't know, the first year it started, but majority of my life. And people go, and even from other parts of the world will go, and everyone from Falmouth, well, lots of Cape Verdean from Falmouth would go up there, as well as supporters of the Cape Verdean community. And that, people come from so far all over the country to go there.
Yeah, that's right. We've been kind of talking about some of these, although these are, ostensive, they have religious purposes, the San João. There's parts of them that are secular, that are secular, but there are also some, as you point out, of these festivals that take place that are huge, that are purely secular and really are just about celebrations of the group itself. And this is, there's a lot of overlap between the purposes in many of these, but it's important to point out, as you do, the different kinds of rituals. And I would put into this the annual, the celebration of the annual anniversary of the club, for example, that takes place in September, which isn't the Cape Verdean Club, which isn't tied into a religious holiday or any particular. In fact, and the club wasn't really even founded in September, but that's when they have the celebration for it. So it's, you know, and the other clubs in town also do this. You know, the PAA has a celebration like this. They have the Day of Portugal celebrations, which is one of the oldest in New England, that they have at the Falmouth Portuguese American Association. Regionally, you also have other festivals, different kinds of festivals, like the SS Madeirense in the blessing of the fleet out in Provincetown. These are all different kinds of rituals. We'll talk about some of these during the next couple of weeks.
I have
Ross.
another, yes, in the Cape Verdean group in Osterville they celebrate St. Anthony's Day, and we usually go there too, you know, just to promote them or help them. So it's like a feast also, the St. Anthony's.
So you bring up, you both have brought up something else really important when we talk about these feasts, which is this idea over here. If we look back on it's not in front of you, but I had rites of exchange and communion. Yeah, was one of our types of rituals, gift-giving rituals. And in some ways, these are gift-giving rituals, because this also happens in other kinds of rituals where, you know, you support their feast and they come over and support your feast.
Yes.
So, and this creates not only community connections just between a local area, but it also creates it across a huge expanse. It increases it across the region, across the state. Or as Doe points out, you know, people coming from San Diego to Onset, I think you said, and going back to a country, even, you know, going back to the Azores or going to Cabo Verde. What is this? How does this create this notion of community that we have with one another by doing this? When someone from the Azores or from Cabo Verde comes to your feast, when someone from New Bedford comes to your feast, what is that saying? You know, what are they saying about where are the boundaries and the contours of this community? Well, it's not just that. What are we saying when people from different communities come and participate in a 4th of July celebration, or when they come and participate in other civic festivals like the holiday parade that takes place, you know, annually? You know, we have these kinds of celebrations that really are about helping people to come together, or helping to create connections, you know, among people. And by the way, we're talking about these June summertime festivals. Memorial Day, although it has nothing to do with you know, with these kinds of with these communities in terms of like the history of how Memorial Day got founded, Memorial Day is nonetheless another one of these kinds of summertime holidays. And we should think of them all in very similar ways. 4th of July, it's another summertime holiday. And the role of these kinds of festivals and rituals in a community, whether it's held at the Cape Verdean Club or the Portuguese American Association, or held in Falmouth Heights, you know, they all have very, very similar, there are similar things that they share and that we can talk about, you know, them sharing. So that's going to be my goal for the next couple of weeks. This, I guess, is a good place to stop.
I just I'm just going to read 2 more quick ones. Someone had said, do some of these rituals create feelings of us versus them? Do the rituals reinforce community but exclude the outsider, which is sort of the other side of that coin, I guess?
Well, you know, you can't create an us without creating a them, right? I mean, that's how us's are defined, right? Like, if everybody belonged, then there would be the thing wouldn't exist anymore, correct? So indeed, it does create a sense of us and them. However, how that us and them is then mediated in anthropological terms or negotiated, or how people actually deal with the fact that there's an us and them, is actually quite complex and complicated. Not everyone is always an us, nor is everyone always a them. And there's ways for us's to become thems and ways for thems to become us's, if you understand what I'm trying to say. Oftentimes, the rituals themselves allow one to do that. So you may not be, you know, you may not belong to the Cape Verdean Club or the Portuguese American Association, but guess what? If you go to their dinner, and if you go to their, you know, to their event, and if you eat the ritual foods, part of that process is about creating an us. You know, that is, you know, you might still have, you know, you might not share everything with people, of course, but the act of that kind of communion or that kind of communal behavior is what creates the commonality between people, you know? So if everybody participates together in a parade, this creates, you know, this in some ways creates forms of commonality.
Yes, yes. There is, I have one more question. There is
Please.
a ritual, on Independence Day is the Cape Verdean Independence Day. New Bedford usually has a parade, and the Cape Verdean Club of Falmouth participates for support. And it's a great time. And there's local bands, there's other people from other Cape Verdean groups from different towns that participate. So it's a wonderful festival, and food, it's like the entire street is closed down in New Bedford for this parade.
So by the way, as we emerge from hopefully, fingers crossed, COVID this summer, and we're able to get out more and more and more and more, and some of the events that have been canceled over the past two plus years, or 2 years, it seems like 50 years, or it seems like 50 minutes. I'm not sure sometimes. But in any case, I really hope that you all take advantage of learning about some of these things, to go to these festivals, because they're a lot of fun. They're fascinating. And, again, like sometimes people think they might be closed to a small community, but they're not. They're really open to everyone. And, join some of these events and check them out. I would encourage everyone to do that. And I also want to give a quick shout out to both Doreen Diaz. I've talked to a little bit about trying to get her to do an oral history. And I'm hopeful that she still will be interested in doing that. And I also want to point out that Rosalind is someone that has already participated in the Migrant Communities Project oral history program, and has talked a lot about the Cape Verdean Club and some of the history of the Cape Verdean Club with a bunch of other people from that club. And I'm really happy that you could be at these events, and I hope that you keep coming and keep telling more. Both of you keep telling more about about the firsthand knowledge you have about a lot of these rituals that we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, Doreen had asked one question way back. Can you please email photos of the old festival? So if you have any photos,
what was the question, Sue?
Can you please email photos of the old festival? So if you have any such photos that you want to send to the group, send them to me and I'll send them out. I don't know.
Okay, yeah, they're all really kind of all over the place. I don't, I took, I think I have photos from one of the festival. I have photos from a lot of different festivals. I would send you to my Facebook page, actually, if you want, and go through my photos of my Facebook page. I have a whole bunch of photos of feasts in Falmouth and other places as well.
Great.
And I have some actually from a Cape Verdean Club annual feast from 2018, I think, or just 2019 or 2018, something like that.
Okay. All right.
Nice.
Tim and Doreen are both talking, but I see you're both muted, so I think you would need to.
No, I just kind of a very different angle on this. Is just I'm recognizing kind of like basically from my background that it's interesting that the way I would describe it is that there's this Puritan, Reformed Protestant kind of thinking that is actually kind of very disinclined or antithetical to this ritual business. And it's just really interesting how that those who come from that background kind of miss this whole the benefits of all this, just because of that religious I don't know what I'll call it, religious what is it, your tendency, I'll call it, or something, right? This doctrinal thing that kind of, so what you're talking about here is very, it's kind of ties kind of even from theology or something in a way, and that so there's some, and so and the community we're talking about really benefits, from this inclination. That it
no doubt. And one thing that we'll talk about also is the way that some of these rituals have transformed over time, right? So how they were practiced 50 years ago, 100 years ago, is not how they're practiced today. And these rituals actually, as you point out, really help these communities to serve very, very important purposes, social, political, economic, in ways that that others do not have. One might argue that at least in this social environment, the reason that these other groups have these thriving festivals is there's a need for them to have them, right? Because that's how they're getting access. That's how they're gaining access to maybe some forms of power that they might not have had before. But I would argue, Tim, that you do have that all groups, all cultural groups, including the WASP group that you're talking about, has these rituals. I mean, they just might not be the same kind of thing, but they certainly take place. I mean, think about dinners at a club or something, or social clubs, the Elks, or some of these other sort of organizations, sort of traditionally WASPy organizations that we might talk about in town, which may not be that today, but certainly historically it might be that. There's tons of these kinds of events that take place. Certainly nothing like some of the ones that we're talking about, of course, but certainly but I bet if you thought about it, you could find areas where this might take place, where similar types of things could happen, where people get to break the rules from the norm. Where getting together with a bunch of people to imbibe lots of drink and food is the norm, right? I bet you I'm thinking of the Rod and Gun Club or the game feeds, right? Those kinds of things. Also, huge inversion rituals. Yeah. Well, Gil, you have a comment on this?
Yeah. Well, yeah. To that point, these so-called WASPy rituals don't they tend to be more closed and exclusive, as opposed to some of the rituals we're talking about? I would assume are more open, more. Let's bring others into the loop and understand us. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it really depends on what the event is. Like, one thing that we're going to talk about, or that we do talk about with the politics of 4th of July parades, for example, is the people that were controlling, certainly in the earlier period that I was historically talking about. But I think there's an argument to be made for this today as well. But the people that control those events are looking for a very specific type of demonstration of American patriotism, right? They were looking for a very specific kind of organization to represent themselves in a very specific kind of way. So in that way, you're right. It's even though it gives a veneer of inclusion, it's actually quite exclusive. Beyond that, to speak more directly to what you're talking about, I mean, like, using exclusion or using ritual as a way to exclude people is, of course, is a form of political ritual, right? By not including people in a ritual, what you're doing is you're protecting your power. If we look at some, Mardi Gras, for example, if we look at the old time Mardi Gras, the way that they tried to protect some of the white nationalist, white supremacist power structure by defining who could or could not participate, right? This is certainly the case. And that takes place in different ways in the present. Yeah, Roz, you want to jump in, or Doe?
Well, I was just going to say that when the Cape Verdean Club first started, they just wanted it to be Cape Verdean people, just like the Elks, the private sector clubs. But since we became open to everyone, now it's not true. But way back, it was sort of a prejudice, because us Cape Verdeans didn't have a place to go because of our skin color.
So that one could argue that was about protecting the ability of that group to find a place for themselves.
Yes,
to make a place
exactly.
For themselves, right?
Yes, thank you.
The same thing it could be said of the Portuguese American Association had a similar,
yes.
had a similar exclusion. What's also interesting, though, is that many of these clubs also excluded women.
Yes.
And also were used to create a certain amount of exclusion for groups of people. So
Miguel,
this goes back to David Leslie's really interesting comment and important comment that we've kind of been talking about since then. But when we talk about inclusion and rituals of community, we also need to talk about how community gets defined, and community isn't always defined in exclusion or in inclusive ways. Oftentimes community is defined in rigid and closed off ways.
Miguel, I have.
Yeah, Dory, you've had your hand up for a while, please.
I'm sorry. I have an example of both the ritual and exclusion, but it all goes back to people like wanting a sense of belonging and being able to celebrate their culture. I grew up going to Holy Ghost festivals and Falmouth, and moving to San Diego, I went to the Point Loma, which is a Portuguese area typically, and for soupish, and I was not at all welcome. I was like being stared at, like with that, like what is a Black person now invading our church and our community? Like it was not very welcome as far as like when I went to Falmouth it was. And then the next year when I went, I wore my Cape Verdean shirt with the islands, and then I had another hat with the Portuguese flag. But and I noticed
How did it go? How did it go that time? How did
reaction.
it? Did people change how they reacted with you based on the way you were dressed the second time?
Oh, yes. The second time people were more friendly, and some people came up and said, oh, my great grandfather lived there for a while or had a house, you know, then more people were talking to me. But the other issue is no one's heard of Cape Verde out here. There's not many Cape Verdeans, so they haven't heard of us. And it was sort of like, you know, like, are we being taken over? But no, it was a total different aspect the second time. And I actually wore my hair different the second time as well. But and I still go regardless because I don't know how to make soupish. And I like the parade, so I take my grandbaby. But it was different than in Falmouth because Falmouth people are more aware of our culture.
Yes, they are. I went to school with Doreen's mother, so the age difference is different. So yes, but yeah, so it was that way here also.
Yeah. But what's interesting is that these rituals are places where a lot of these very, very important social issues are worked through, right? Mm-hmm. You know, where people can create inclusion, where people can create exclusion, where people can respond to what's happening outside of the space of the ritual. You know, the ritual in some ways is an idealized form of something that is different from what happens on the other side of the ritual. But it has an effect. It can change. It can transform. The ritual can transform how people think about the other side, as much as what's happening within the ritual is a reflection of what's going on, yes, you know, outside. So, you know, for me, rituals and anthropology are fascinating. I'm just going to call them things, and they really are just a fascinating cultural events or cultural complexes. And I'm really looking forward to talking to you all more about this in the next couple of weeks. Yeah. And we'll talk some about. Hopefully, we're going to talk about the Festive do Espírito Santo next week. If Lou is available, he's the guy that if you were in the last round of Joy of Learning course that I did, Lou was teaching that with me and knows an awful lot. He wrote a book about the Holy Ghost feast in Falmouth, so he'll be helping me with that as a guest speaker. But again, as most of us have all participated in these events, I love it that we're all able to talk about these things, and you know, I really want to make this one this time around. Given that we're talking about some contemporary things that we all participate in, to really make this like we've been doing today. I hope you enjoyed the more interactive nature of this, and that's my goal with it moving forward. So looking forward to seeing you next week.
Yeah, great discussion. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And I just sent out the link for next week, and I will send another reminder one when it gets a little closer too. And if anyone has any questions, send them to me. I can pass them on to Miguel or
and Sue, I don't know what your time is. If you need to go have lunch or something, or I guess not. It's a little early there. But if anybody wants for the next 10 minutes or so, I can stay online, and
yeah, I can leave it open if you'd like.
Has another question if they want to ask. I can do that if you're interested.
I can do that if you like. I'll stop the recording, but
yeah, so you can stop the recording, and if anybody just wants to have a little chat.
Stop the recording.